I've always been worried myself. I fought in the most demanding of the Herrick tours, and I'm pretty sure that Telic 10, when we came out of Basra Palace, was right up there amongst the most demanding of the Iraq tours. I've never considered myself a victim. I saw some abhorrent things. I've got friends who have suffered life-changing injuries as a consequence, and I've got friends who didn't come back. But none of that makes me a victim.
My name is Jonny Ball, and I'm the founder of Campaign Force, a not-for-profit that inspires, trains, and coaches the armed forces community to stand up and serve again. I've served on the front line of military operations and in civilian life, the front line of UK politics. This Veterans in Politics podcast is a set of interviews brought to you by Campaign Force and sets out to explore how the military community can help make our politics a better place. I lean into my little black book of contacts and sit down with individuals from across the world of politics, sharing secrets, giving tips and advice, and inspiring the next generation. We are Campaign Force. This is the Veterans in Politics podcast. Let's introduce you to our guest.
In this Conservative Party conference special, we sit down with Armed Forces Minister James Heappey MP. James is a veteran of Northern Ireland, Iraq and Afghanistan. In this episode, he reflects on what it means to not only be a veteran in politics, but also a minister. He's refreshingly open, honest and human, something that our politics badly needs. Thanks to Job Oppo and Company X Consulting for your support. It's time for you to meet our guest.
It's absolutely brilliant to be joined today by James Heappey, the Minister for the Armed Forces, the MP for Wales since 2015, a former Rifles officer with service in Northern Ireland, Iraq and Afghanistan, and joins us today from Conservative Party Conference. How is conference going for you so far, James?
So far, so good, actually. I mean, the bizarre thing is, for all that's going on in the world right now, there isn't tons of defence and security discussion at conference, to be honest with you. The foreign policy fringe, such that is, and inevitably at these sorts of events, actually, it's sort of domestic policy that is of most interest to most of the delegates that are attending, and most of the sort of lobbying that goes on here is around domestic policy. So that tends to dominate. But even in the sort of foreign policy fringe that there is, it's mostly around sort of COP26 and climate. And so the sort of honest answer to your question is that hitherto there have been few opportunities to talk defence, but there's an event coming up this afternoon where we will consider the future in Afghanistan, and obviously the defence ministerial team are giving our sort of address to conference this afternoon. So it's not been as busy as previous conferences, but everybody seems in high spirits. I suspect mostly because everybody's just really pleased to all be in one place for the first time in a really long time, and sort of feels quite strange to be in a packed bar, but at the same time quite nice because all your friends are there and it's great to catch up with people.
Yeah, and you mentioned the defence team there, which is well represented by the veterans community, with Secretary of State being a veteran and yourself being a veteran as well. And what, in terms of going back to your army and your political career, do you have any recollections or reflections about the individuals, or how you made those decisions to go into the military and politics, and how you reflect on that now? And would you perhaps do anything different, as in the benefit of hindsight, going into your military career or your political career?
Yeah, well, I mean, I should mention Leo Doherty as well, of course. There are three of us who are veterans on the defence team, which I think, by the way, is a blessing and a curse. A blessing in so much as the MOD and the Armed Forces love an acronym, and you already kind of half speak the lingo as you arrive, and also because you are enamored is the wrong word. You're not overawed by the uniform, and I think there can be a thing when you arrive in the MOD where you must sort of assume that anything that is said to you by anybody in a uniform must be exactly right because they're in a uniform. And I think if you've served, you're more comfortable challenging military opinion. On the other hand, it's a curse. I expect if you spoke to CDS, particularly once he can go weapons 3 in a few weeks' time and sort of, and offer his true reflections on what it's been like to work with politicians, he would probably reflect that those of us who have served are slightly more tempted to go, no, CDS, take a knee. The answer here is to go right flanking, and then you have to sort of watch them sort of bite their lip whilst politely explaining that we do the policy, but they'll work out how to execute it thereafter. But look, what would I have done differently? I just there was no grand design in this for me. I didn't enter. I went into military service because I wanted to be a soldier. I had done PO visits with the Navy beforehand and decided that wasn't for me, but the Army was. And I spent the first 9 years of my military career, which has ended up being the entirety of my commissioned career, a year at Sandhurst beforehand, thrusting to make general. That was the plan. And I wanted to command a rifle company, command my battalion, command a brigade, and away we go. And it was only when I was posted to MOD main building after finishing as adjutant to rifles that I was exposed to the sort of wonderful, chaotic, but exhilarating world of policy making. And I thought that there might be a sort of role in that for me. I thought initially that maybe that would be as a policy advisor or in a think tank or maybe as a journalist. I didn't think at all that it would be as a frontline politician, but Liam Fox, who was my constituency MP from where I grew up, gave me a job when I first left the Army, and actually it didn't take me long after working for Liam to realise that I'd quite like to give it a go myself. And I'd always been interested in politics, but as I say, it was sort of an incremental journey rather than all done with some sort of great design that I was going to sort of do X number of years as a warrior and then become a politician and be PM by the time I was 45. That was never quite the case.
Well, you spoke there about some of the preparation that's happened organically through your military career and through those various postings as well, and some fortune as well. And politics, let's face it, needs some fortune. But when you go into a military career, you also mentioned some of the preparation you do, those visits, the fact finding. What, if any, preparation is there available for you when you're transitioning out of the military and going forward and doing a successful election campaign? And what kind of preparation did you do outside of those things that you've already just mentioned now?
Well, I mean, the answer is that in my day there was none, and actually I still think there's not very much, and it can be quite disconcerting because those of us, every salary I've ever earned is published on a website, and you don't get rich as a captain or as a major in the British Army, and although you're not badly off, but you're not earning enough to be saving thousands upon thousands of pounds every month, and so just financially going into politics was a massive leap into the unknown. I had to fight a seat that I needed to win from the other side. There was no guarantee that I'd be successful in doing that. And I knew that I was going to need to campaign pretty much full time to win the seat. And so, when you go from an environment where you're in a very safe, clearly not when you're being shot at in Sangin, but career-wise, in terms of accommodation, pay, career progression, the military is quite a safe environment in that sense. To being an environment where I had no income. Any income I sought to generate for myself would be at the expense of my time to campaign, and the goal was to get elected to Parliament. And so, I racked up £30,000 worth of debt over 2 years of campaigning pretty much full time. Thank heavens I won. If I'd lost, I would have had the debt and a completely empty diary and have had to have been paying it all off. And so, going into politics is not without risk. And I think that can be quite intimidating for for people as they leave the army, because you might quite naturally draw the conclusion, well, how on earth do you go into politics, particularly if you're going to fight a marginal seat, without lots of money behind you? Plenty of people do it, but it just requires lots of sacrifice. And I think for those of us who are used to the very sort of stable terms and conditions that come with military service, it can be particularly off-putting. Now, look, lots of people make the transition because there are lots of veterans in the House of Commons, 3 of them within the 5-person defence ministerial team. But I would love us to find a sort of pathway for making the transition easier, because I think I can only speak for the Conservative Party, but I think that our members are very proud of being represented by ex-military personnel where that's the case. I got a thunderous round of applause very early in my final selection meeting when somebody, I think they thought they were asking me an unhelpful question, and they sort of stood up and said, Mr. Heappey, you've got no campaign experience. And I said, well, I've done all my campaigning in Iraq and Afghanistan.
Drop the mic.
Yeah, exactly. Boom. And that is a disadvantage, because I think if you go into politics, there are some councillors who have joined us today, and there's a sort of grind to being in politics. There's sort of knocking the doors, delivering the leaflets, attending the parish council meetings. And there is a sort of sense that you have to kind of serve your time going through that process in order to sort of get a shot at running for Parliament. And veterans, we can't do that. I mean, we could spend time doing it as veterans, but if you seek to transition directly from a regular military career into politics, you can't have done all of that, because Queen's Regs doesn't allow you to sort of actively participate in party politics whilst in military service. So, but my sense is that plenty of associations are willing to give you that credit, but financially, it's still an enormous risk, and you learn by doing. I mean, I went from being an adjutant in a battalion where literally, the QM probably had a few kind of stressful decisions about how to make everything work, but by and large, you were sort of within a chain of command. Your job was to interpret orders and then deliver on them. And all of a sudden, I was having to raise money for myself. We raised over £250,000 over the course of the 2.5 years that I was campaigning. I employed staff. I had to rent premises for my campaign HQ. I was responsible for the sort of recruitment of volunteers. All these things were completely new skills. The military skill set gives you lots of transferable stuff in which you can make a pretty good fist of it. But it was pretty exciting, to say the least, and you learn by doing.
I think you're probably the first guest on the show that's gone into that honesty around how much this costs. Both the human cost, of course, comes with it, and family, but also the financial cost. And in fact, in terms of that transition about being able to learn campaigning while still serving and the restrictions of Queen's Regs, James Sunderland and Dan Jarvis are probably 2 exceptions who directly transferred out of the military straight into politics. And James goes into some detail around that on the podcast with us in a previous season. But it's a really difficult situation to be able to go from military service, all those restrictions around campaigning, to then leap into a campaign and raise money to pay for it. So I'm really grateful for you to share that story with us, because it's not something we've really discussed. And the other element as well that you've alluded to there is basically running a little small business as well, when you've got a team and staff and an office to fund once you're an MP. So I guess that brought its own challenges as well, right?
It did. And look, I don't in any way diminish the achievement of James Sunderland, Dan Jarvis, but there are people like Jonny and I who had to win the side, and therefore you've got to put in a draft to win the seat in the first place. That's a whole other challenge. If you've been selected to contest a relatively safe seat, you've got a campaign, you've got to work hard, but it's over a much shorter period of time and with a higher degree of certainty, or a higher probability of success. It was a big leap into the unknown. And like I said, I mean, I shudder to think what would have happened if the election had gone the other way, because I would have had all the debt. I had got at the time of the 2015 general election, when I was elected, I had a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old child, had a mortgage, and I would have rolled the dice and piled in spectacularly, and I suspect I'd have been still paying for it now. But there you go. You've got to sort of. It's not meant to be easy. I think sort of to get to Parliament should be hard. It's the most extraordinary honour to be a parliamentarian, and if it were easy, you'd probably get the wrong type of people doing it.
100%. And I certainly think the right type of people are the veterans community, which is why I evangelise over this, which is why I'm trying to create those pathways from the military into service. And it's why I position myself as cross-party, politically agnostic. But with that, working really closely with the Conservative Friends of the Armed Forces, we're starting to offer that bespoke pathway into the Conservative Party as well. And long may that work continue. But you are there now. You are a member of Parliament and you're a minister. What's it like being a minister? Are there any sort of misconceptions people might have about ministerial life or about you and your role in it? What's it like?
No, I mean, honestly, there are so many occasions where you are sat there and you realise that what you have just said or what you have just heard is almost exactly the script from Thick of It or Yes, Minister. And you sort of have to pinch yourself at your sort of shuddering lack of originality that you're sort of playing up to the caricature, even if desperately trying not to.
I won't ask you who's Malcolm Tucker in that scenario. I'll be...
Yeah. I mean, it's amazing. I mean, I sort of... There are people who revel in opposition. There are people who sort of find being part of the team that is government too constraining, and they want to they feel like they can do more by being their own voice, running their own show, and good luck to them. I don't begrudge that. There are plenty of people for whom that is most definitely the case. But politics is about power. It's about the power to affect change, the power to deliver on your agenda, the power to do something good. And I don't know why, if you had the opportunity to serve in Her Majesty's government, you wouldn't, because there is no better opportunity than to deliver your agenda, deliver change for the people than the causes you care about. And yes, you have to sort of bring in the ego a little bit and accept that you're part of a team, and you can't always say what you want to say. But I just think that the worst day in government is better than the worst day in opposition or on the back benches, because you literally have the power to affect change with every swish of your pen. And that's an awesome, but also slightly intimidating responsibility. You sort of realize that when the sort of stuff that comes across my desk, Minister, can we send people to this country in the world to do this activity? Here is the risk assessment, but it's your decision. And ultimately thereafter, if it goes wrong, or we're working with people that prove to be morally reprehensible, or even worse, if we were to take casualties, then ultimately that's a decision that you've taken to deploy, and that has huge gravity. Similarly, though, it is for those of us who are in the defence team right now, we've got this amazing opportunity with the funding settlement that we've won to do something quite long term and meaningful. You can to be able to do an IR and not have to then sort of argue year after year for the funding to deliver the IR, but to get the IR and to get a funding settlement that runs through it is different. It's new. And that means that things like forward presence, getting the Navy off into all corners of the world to fly the flag and stick up for the UK interest, getting the Army up and running with the sort of forward presence, lingering battle groups that we envisage, doing more with the UN and sort of being a force for good in the world, making the Air Force a bit more expeditionary, and sort of figure out how we work with tier 2 air forces, not just sort of tier 1 peer air forces, These are all things that we can sort of be getting on with confidence that we've got the funding secure for a number of years. And again, I mean, I just think this is an awesome time to be a defence minister. And if you've come into politics with a passion for making things better for our armed forces and for making our nation safer, like, wow, what a great time to be in the defence team.
Oh, yeah, it sounds fascinating. Going through all that work, our listeners are probably going to learn so much about what it's like to be a minister, and just have a small insight just in that short explanation. But actually, I think we've recently got to know you a bit, James, if I'm honest, and we've also got to know Ben, in particular on those very emotional, very personal reflections during the Afghan Kabul and op pitting. And we saw the human side of politics. Nobody could not be moved by Ben Wallace and that LBC interview at the height of that crisis. And indeed, you were quite outspoken. You mentioned sometimes you have to rein yourself in, but to be honest with you, it's quite refreshing to see you just be human. And you are a veteran. You are a veteran like me of Afghanistan. And as us as a community, and many of our listeners do come from that community, seek to reflect. And arguably the fish tank has been shaken and the silt is up there in the water and needs to settle again. But how have you reflected on of that experience? Because you had a really difficult military period in your own service in Afghanistan. You mentioned Sangin, and many of our listeners will identify that. But how have you been able to reconcile and understand what it meant for us all as a community?
Well, I mean, I think you instinctively understand what it means as a community, because I'm one of you. I'm a veteran, and I'm a veteran that happened to have had the misfortune, good fortune, I suppose, in terms of serving alongside a remarkable battalion full of remarkable people at a remarkable time. But Herrick 10 in the Upper Helmand Valley was
Tough.
Was about as shit as it gets. Yeah. And so, I kind of feel like I have a bit of authority with which to sort of speak as a veteran. But of course, bits of Kabul the airlift and the drawdown of Afghanistan were deeply personal. And I know that the public like to see a bit of emotion, a bit of conviction, and they certainly like to see ministers who are speaking from personal experience and have a bit of authority in what they're saying. I think we have to be careful though, because there are some veterans who are politicians who play up the veterans bit without recognizing that they're now in a position to do something about it. They are now politicians, and I think I was acutely aware during all of it, and I thought I tried to sort of answer questions whenever I was on TV and radio that tried to convey that I got this. Yeah. That I wasn't there to offer commentary as a veteran. I wasn't there to simply be critical of what we were or weren't doing, or to I was there to deliver answers to the problems that existed, and so yes, I was I couldn't help but expose some of the internal angst I was feeling as a veteran, and having given so much of my 20s to Iraq and Afghanistan, clearly I feel as keenly as any other veteran of that period a sort of sense of, was it worth it? Mates lost their legs, didn't come back, and now the world seems to want to move on, and yet my mates are still living with those scars, and how do we deal with that? But it wasn't my job to, if you're a politician and you're going on TV and all you're being is the sort of emotional veteran, well, there are hundreds of thousands of people who can be veterans and be emotional. If you're a politician, your job is to go on TV and radio and front up to the problems and start to try and talk about what you're going to do about it. And if you can't do as much about it as you'd want to, you need to be honest about that fact. That's what I try to be.
Well, it certainly came across, that honesty, and it has now, if I'm perfectly honest, using that word honest again, there we go. But I guess in politics, you found a bit of a purpose again, because we know in the for our military careers, you get a real strong sense of purpose. It's in our DNA, and whatever we do, even the most mundane to the most punchy of tours like you've just described, that sense of purpose is always there, omnipresent. And I think for
Yeah.
some veterans, when they do transition, they find a job, not the job, and they should get the job, but there's all those other bits around it as well, around purpose, what they might do in their communities, which is why I'm such a huge flag waver for standing up and serving again. And I think that politics is just one example in which way veterans can be visible in their communities as veterans and find a sense of purpose as well. I mean, how have you maintained your sense of purpose since leaving the armed forces? And what advice might you give to other veterans finding a purpose once they transition and settle in their communities?
Well, Jonny, I think that is I think that is a key distinction, which makes it easier. Actually, I think that in politics, you still get a real sense that you're serving your nation, serving your community. We all, when you're in the Army, Navy, Air Force, when you get a set of orders, there's an in order to, and beyond the in order to is a higher purpose, sort of sense that what you're doing is to help other people succeed, and the in order tos add up to something really strategic and meaningful and and valuable. And so it's really easy to derive value because you can see that what you're doing is part of a plan that is transformative. And for many veterans, I think the sort of transfer into civilian employment, when the in order to is make a bit more profit, the in order to is to be a bit more productive, the in order to is to complete the project before end of month results. I mean, that can feel quite hollow. It can feel quite meaningless. No, it's not. There are millions and millions of people, and our economy relies on people getting out of bed every morning and working in order to make a bit more profit, to be a bit more productive. So I don't mean to diminish that, but I think as a veteran, when you're used to this sort of constant sense of purpose and that you're a part of a machine, part of a plan, you're doing something of value, it can be really discombobulating to be out of that. And all of a sudden to sort of think, well, what am I for? I've lost my purpose here. I've lost my sense of self. Now, I don't think I don't think every veteran should therefore seek a role in elected office, although there's room for many, many more. But I do think that it doesn't surprise me that lots of veterans seek to get involved in community activism in an apolitical way, just being part of a community group, trying to put something back, so that they get that sort of drug of doing good. Because I think that is the, lots of us, if you've been posted as I was to cavalry barracks in Hounslow pre-renovation, you're certainly not in the military for the luxurious accommodation. And if you've been sat, this is a bit of an officer's thing, but if you've been sat in Sophie's Steakhouse on the Fulham Road on a Friday evening with all of your mates in the city, you realise that they're able to pay their share of the bill with somewhat more comfort than you can pay yours. So you're not in it for the money either. But what you're in it for is a sense of, I'm doing something for my nation. I'm doing something that is worthy. I'm doing something that my family and my friends and my community are proud of. And I would encourage all veterans, when they leave, even if they've got a 300 grand a year contract with Deutsche Bank to leave into, they will still find, I think, that there is something missing in their life, and that thing that's missing is a sense of service. And to become a local councillor, to be part of a local community group, to be involved in community activism, will give them that one little bit that all of that money can't buy, and will help them to maintain that sense of purpose and service that they've enjoyed so much in their military careers.
And I'm going to go really retro here. When I was talking to Tom Tugendhat from my own cap badge, we were talking about the big society. So perhaps the big society as a political beast came a little bit too soon, because we're certainly seeing that now in spades during the COVID-19 period that we've lived in, and the veterans community, how they walked towards danger and volunteered for organisations like OpReact, which at the time was led by a veteran. Rich Sharp. And, we're doing so much good in the community. Voluntary is part of that big society. James, I think any closing moments before we sort of close out?
No, look, I just, hats off to the work you're doing, Jonny, with Campaign Force. And last night we had the Conservative Friends of the Armed Forces drinks. I think that there are lots and lots and lots of people in the armed forces who think they would like to serve on in politics, but because we can't actively participate in politics during our service, very often we don't really know where to start. We don't really know how to get in there. And then when we find out about the routes into it, they can feel quite sort of financially prohibitive. And very often, when you're used to that process of sort of looking at the jobs lists, filling in your PPP, the sort of the mostly transparent process of having your OJARs or SJARs graded and sort of seeing where you come on a board, and you can sort of understand. It's a very sort of meritocratic, systematic approach to career management, and the make your own luck. If you don't do it, nobody else will. Sort of much more sort of chaotic, lack of safety net way of getting into politics can be terrifying. So look, everything that you can do to bust the myths, support people, and to reinforce that there are many, many ways to serve other than in elected office, and that veterans in a community involved in community activism, working with deprived children, trying to support the vulnerable, exactly as you refer to, in times like COVID, to bring to bear our organizational skills and frankly just our risk appetite in order to make a difference when others in the community are overawed by the challenge. That's what veterans bring to society. The country by default thinks about the armed forces and its veterans community with enormous pride, but I don't always think they understand us. And the more that we can sort of be out in the communities, showing what we do, celebrating our service, because maybe if you'll indulge, that is another point that I would like to make. I've always been worried myself. I fought in the most demanding of the Herrick tours, and I'm pretty sure that Telic 10, when we came out of Basra Palace, was right up there amongst the most demanding of the Iraq tours. I've never considered myself a victim. I saw some abhorrent things. I've got friends who have suffered life-changing injuries as a consequence, and I've got friends who didn't come back. But none of that makes me a victim, and I wouldn't swap my service in the armed forces for anything. I'm hugely proud of what I did, and I want the nation to celebrate us, to understand us, to want to use us, not to feel sorry for us. And that I think is rather too often the veterans that make it on TV are telling a story that evokes sympathy. What we want is empathy, and for people to celebrate the skills that we bring and to know that we're proud of our service, and that there are those of us who are injured physically and mentally as a consequence, and we need support, but that we're not broken, we're not victims, we're proud, and we'd do it all again.
James Heappey, Minister for the Armed Forces, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Job Oppo are pleased to be working with the Veterans in Politics podcast series to help us in our quest to change the narrative around veteran employment. Thanks to the Veterans in Politics team for giving Job Oppo the chance to be involved in this fantastic initiative. Together, we hope to help many veterans realise their potential and secure the job, not just a job.
Company X Consulting Limited are a consultancy company specialising in the provision of skills such as programme, project and portfolio management, information assurance and cyber services. We offer full transitional support to the veterans and service leavers community. We are currently recruiting. To find out more about our business, please visit our website at www.cxe-ltd.com or check out our LinkedIn at Company X Consulting Limited.
Thanks to our guests, and thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed this podcast, hit subscribe now. Alternatively, you can support our mission by checking out in the show notes below, where you can rate, donate, or become our mate. Thank you.